Anyone with a sense of humor would imagine that this was quite well timed, I would say, um, for you to get some materials about the last lecture in this series, and then all of a sudden to have an announcement of normalization of relations. Uh, I want to talk about it in more detail in a few moments, but I want to do at least spend some time on the original topic for today. What I felt last week after we were done, I received many really excellent questions, not all of which was I able to answer. Um, and I thought that in self-critique, there was not enough time over these last two sessions for you to pose thoughtful questions and get answers to them. So when I spoke to Ari, I suggested that I send you some materials for this week that you could view that would give you an opportunity to already be thinking about what we were going to talk about so that we could spend a significant amount of time today really just answering questions as a summation of the last 2 weeks and of course of today. Little did I know that the world would turn itself upside down and that we would have even more questions or at least the thoughts and comments, etc. So we'll try and do a lot of things. We will not have enough time, and maybe we'll talk again in the spring or something of that kind. But um, but I guess I should start with with these events, and then I'll work back into other content because you must be most interested. So I literally just spent several hours today debriefing about this with several people involved in in NGOs in Morocco, and uh, and I would offer the following interesting thought for you to consider. Since Thursday, while King Mohammed VI did communicate with Trump, he has not communicated with Bibi Netanyahu. He has communicated with Mahmoud Abbas. Now, what that suggests is what the both even in the Israeli press and certainly in the Arab press, there is a criticism of the king for having taken this step before the Israelis have found some positive resolution of the Palestinian question. In other words, it feels like he's capitulating and basically dropping the Palestinians like a lead balloon, as they say, as in fact many people think the Gulf states did. Now, the Gulf states are a unique configuration of their own. Very few people live in these places. They're really sort of the center of world capitalism in many ways at the moment, and their relationship with Israel, as you're I'm sure already reading, is mostly about money and technology. But when you come to Morocco, you have 1 million Moroccan Jews, including descendants, obviously, who may come from mixed backgrounds, but you have 1 million Moroccan Jews living in Israel. And they represent a significant force in the Israeli electorate and the Israeli civil society. And my sources in Morocco suggest that the king decided that trying to influence this Palestinian-Israeli impasse from the outside was not working. And therefore, if he could get inside, he could become a force in a very interesting way, which is he could challenge the evolution of Israeli Moroccans, which has basically devolved into a very right-wing uh, point of view in Israel, rather anti-Arab in general and anti-Palestinian, but retaining an extraordinary fealty, not just loyalty, to the king and to Morocco. You'll almost never discover a Moroccan Jew who has something nasty to say about Morocco. You can find them, but it's very rare. And there's a great sense of pride. I'll give you an example. Here in New York, where there are enough Moroccan Jews to have a big association, when they have a meeting of this association of Moroccan Jews, usually held at the Center for Jewish History in Manhattan, which, as I mentioned in my bio, I directed for several years. They put a portrait, big portrait of the king up on the stage. They put a Moroccan flag up on the stage, and they begin the program with singing the national anthem of Morocco. Um, there's almost no other Jewish ethnic group that does anything like that, if you think about it. So the king, it sounds like, is is going into this relationship with Israel with a goal to begin to influence opinion by the fact that he now becomes an insider instead of being an outsider. And, you know, there's no predicting what may come of that. Because as you'll remember from my first lecture, the king of Morocco has two distinct positions, one in the Arab world and one in the Islamic world. Or maybe you could really say they're both in the Islamic world. The dynasty claims direct descent from the Prophet Muhammad. And second of all, the dynasty holds the position in the Islamic world internationally as, quote unquote, the defender of the faithful. So it's not just, it would already be a big deal if he was their king. But beyond that, he holds a significant position within the broader Islamic world and the more narrow historical Islamic world from Arabia. And it sounds like the hope is that he will use that as leverage, not only to eventually change policy, but first to educate. It will be a completely different and new voice. And that's something very significant. And we shall see what comes of it. For those of you who have looked into it with a little bit more detail, you are probably aware of the fact that there was a trade here. The trade was that Morocco's long claim to an area which is called the Western Sahara, which is sort of the Sahara on the edge of Morocco, between Morocco and Algeria. Morocco is at the end of North Africa. Algeria is the next country over. Between them sits a section of the Sahara called the Western Sahara, and the Moroccans have claimed the Western Sahara as theirs for decades. And the native population, tribal population of that area has claimed independence, and they actually have a military presence, the Polisario. And this has been a dispute which has not been resolved. And the United Nations has called for, some kind of election, and the Moroccans have not wanted to participate in something like that. So, and by the way, I should add that all of this is a derivative of the colonial period when the French and the Spanish controlled Morocco. And the net result is that the Moroccans claim that the border was placed in the wrong place. It's a dispute that, in a certain sense, has many parallels to what's involved with the Israelis and the Palestinians. And some people say that the reason that that this agreement contains this element is in many ways because this is a place where they ironically share a piece of strange colonialism. And of course, the second piece is that the Moroccans have been given a promise of the ability to buy sophisticated weapons from the United States. I don't want to go into this in detail either, but on Friday I was on a seminar in which there was a great deal of discussion about the fact that the United States, which has been claiming for years to be disengaging its troops internationally, minimizing the presence of armed soldiers in various places around the world, has replaced them with arms, and that we have, increased even further our sale of arms in many places around the world. And of course, this is not necessarily a positive or good development. But in any case, that is part of this deal as well. The Moroccans are going to be allowed to buy certain sophisticated weapons, drones, and things of this kind from the United States, and probably eventually, if not already, from Israel. So, um, so it's a deal not exactly made in heaven from one point of view, but from the strictly Jewish and Israeli point of view, it's an important positive development that there now is a real Arab state with Jews still living in it, but with an enormous historical Jewish population who have finally come to terms and made themselves uh, a uh, a partner in some way with the state of Israel. And uh, if the king acts on the things that I was suggesting before, it could have a profound effect. So I'm happy to come back to this with questions later, but I want to now come back to talk about what was the topic for today, um, which was the association of young Moroccans who are known as originally as the Mimouna Foundation and now as Association Mimuna, who they are, how I came into contact with them, what they're all about, and what they represent. So if you watched the video with the two young people, Laziza Dalil and El Mehdi Boudra, you really got a firsthand taste of it. But I want to tell you, I want to take you back into my own experience so that you get some sense of really how amazing this phenomena of these young people is. So if you remember in lecture one, I introduced you, I even showed you a picture of Rafi El Maleh, who is the last Jewish guide in the whole Arab world. And by the way, he won't be the last now, because now there will be more. This new development will produce Jewish tourism and Israeli tourism, and we're already working on an institute to train new guides. But at the moment, and for many years, he's been the last Jewish guide in the whole Arab world. And since I'm bringing my students every year to Morocco, and for many years was bringing adult teacher groups as well, he would always call me and say, you know, I found this, let's go here, let's go there. And one year, in probably 2007, he called me up and he said, listen, I'm on the campus of Al Ahwain University in Ifran in northern Morocco, about an hour outside of the city of Fez. And I'm here with a group of students who call themselves Moadon Mimuna. Moadon is the Hebrew word for a club, Moadon Mimuna. And I'm here because they want to know more about Moroccan Jewish history. I think that you should bring the Kivunim students to this campus and we should meet with them when you're here in December. I said, really, Rafi, I'm surprised. I wasn't aware that there were enough Jewish students on any campus in Morocco to have like a Jewish club, you know, a Moroccan Jewish club. He says to me, did I say they were Jewish? And then he goes on to describe how all of the students involved in the creation of this club and its members are all Muslim, studying Moroccan Jewish history, Moroccan Judaism, even Hebrew language. He puts up on the screen of our then Skype call a copy of their calling card where they've actually put under Moadon Mimuna in English, they put it in Hebrew. Obviously, they also had it in French and had it in Arabic. So I said, yeah, we better go and meet these kids. So we go up to this campus. So the campus has a story which is unique in and of itself. It's a gorgeous campus, now maybe 20 years old. Beautiful campus up in the mountains outside of Fez. Ifran is a ski town. When you drive into it, it looks like you're in Switzerland. In Morocco, all the rooftops are flat, except in Ifran, where they're like in Switzerland, because the snow falls and you want the snow to fall down. You don't want it to break the roof. You may not know about these things in San Diego, but you know, these are important considerations in places where it snows. So the history of this campus is quite amazing. In the early years of the 21st century, there was an oil spill from a Saudi tanker off of the shore of Morocco in the Mediterranean. And the king of Saudi Arabia gave King Hassan II $20 million in case there was any cleanup necessary to take care of the cleanup. The winds blew the other way, and the oil never touched the shore of Morocco. But it is against protocol to return a royal gift. So Hassan II proposed to the king of Saudi Arabia that they build on their campus a college which would be modeled on American universities. They would actually teach in English, but would be a center for the study of the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it would be 80% students from Morocco, 20% students from the rest of the world, with a significant bias to accepting students from other parts of the Arab world. The King of Morocco agreed. They built this beautiful new campus. It's gorgeous. And that's what Al Akhwain University is. Al Akhwain refers to the three brothers, the three religions. So I agree with Rafi. When Kivunim is in Fez, December of 2008, we'll come to this campus and meet these students. We go up to the campus. We tour around. We talk with them. We hear a presentation about the Mimuna Association. And then as we're leaving, and I have to emphasize, in the entire time that we're there, maybe an hour, I had a private, like, walking with the founder, Elmedi Boudra, who, if you watch the film, you met. Maybe 5 minutes we spoke privately together. When we get to our bus, he says to me, so therefore he doesn't know me at all, this young man, Elmedi Boudra. He says to me, Peter, the students of Mimuna have decided that we want to hold the first conference on the Holocaust in the Arab world here on our campus. Will you help us? So because I'm such a genius, I said, yes, I'll help you. And that following spring, he and Laziza, who again, you both of whom you could have met if you watched the videos or if you watched them after, they were in New York on vacation. They were then a couple. They're not a couple anymore, but they were a couple then. And they sat in my living room here in New York and started to talk about this conference, what they wanted to do. So I said, look, I don't think you want to have a conference called a Conference on the Holocaust. This is going to be very controversial. But how about if we have the conference in regard and respect to the story of King Mohammed V, who, as you will recall if you were at our first lecture, protected and saved the Jews of Morocco from the Vichy French and from the Nazis. If you want to tell the story and give a tribute to King Mohammed V, you will have to tell the story of the Holocaust. And I'm happy to bring a Holocaust scholar. I brought somebody that many of you know from California, Michael Birnbaum, Muni Birnbaum, with me to Morocco to be the scholar. I brought a Holocaust survivor. It was the first time they'd ever heard any presentation by a survivor. And I brought Kivunim alumni who had gone on and taken Holocaust courses in college. I brought about 10 alumni with me as well. And in September of 2009 or 2010, I forget exactly which it is, I sent you an article that was in the New York Times about it. We held this first conference on the Holocaust on their campus. It was extraordinary. And it was really an amazing event. The students, they all came, they all arranged everything. They ordered kosher food from Fez to be brought up to the campus so that any of the guests who were kosher would have kosher food to eat, like me. And it was really astounding. On the second day, we conducted the proceedings of the conference in Casablanca at the Museum of Moroccan Jewry that I told you about 2 weeks ago. And when the conference was all over, the executive committee came up to me and they said, listen, this was very powerful. And we'd really like to do a little bit more. We think we should go to Auschwitz. Can you arrange for us to go to Auschwitz? So I said, look, if you want to go to Auschwitz, I'll certainly try and be helpful. But in my opinion, if you want to take another step, you need to come to Israel. At this point, they all like throw up their hands. Peter, don't even mention such a thing. Israel, it's off the table. Maybe if someday there's peace with the Palestinians, okay, but there's no way that we're going to Israel, and please don't even mention it. So I said, okay. I said, I'll work on whatever you want. I go back to New York. Several weeks go by. After about 5 weeks, El Mehdi, the founder of Mimuna, calls me up. He's then a junior in college. He says, so, Peter, I need to know how many students can go on the trip. I said, what trip? He said, well, to Israel, of course. I said, what do you mean to Israel, of course? You told me that there was no chance. Israel's off the table. He said, yes, but when we went back after you left, we decided to have meetings every week until every one of our 30 members could speak. And we went around the table, and everybody had a chance to say what they thought. And everybody said exactly the same thing. If Peter can bring American Jewish college students to Morocco and treat our religion and our culture and our history and our country with the respect that he does to us, then the least that we can do is the same to him. We're coming to Israel. So then I had quite a task because I had to put together a trip. I had to get visas. I had to put together this trip. It was the first time, and by the way, it was the last time that there has been a trip of Arab youth to Israel from anywhere in the Arab world. Even Egypt and Jordan, who have peace treaties, have not had groups of students come to Israel. There are students, as I told you, I think last week, studying at the Arava Institute, but they have never traveled around Israel. This was completely unique. And it was an incredible adventure. I carry in my backpack the visa that was printed for them. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience. And the Mimuna Association today has now continued. On the one hand, they continue to be an organization of college students in Morocco, all Muslim, but the leadership, or maybe I should say the co-leadership, because there's campus leadership and then there's organizational leadership, are now in their early 30s. And they're the most amazing people. I only remind you, those of you who saw the footage, and I tell you, those of you who didn't, the story that Laziza Dalil tells on the video, that when she was I think a junior in college, she went, actually maybe it was even when she was still in high school, she went with some friends to Paris, and they had rented an apartment in what is one of the major Jewish neighborhoods of Paris, Moroccan Jewish neighborhoods of Paris. And she said one day she had just finished shopping and she had a lot of bags, so she was waiting at a bus stop, even though she only lived a few blocks away, to make it easier to get all this stuff home. And an elderly woman walked by and said to her, "It was better here in Paris when the Germans were here." Meaning, as Laziza says, she knew right away that because of her dark hair, the assumption was that she was a Jew, and she was in this Jewish neighborhood, and she sort of looked like she might be Jewish. So this woman was basically saying to her something very anti-Semitic. And Laziza went back to Morocco and says, I realized I had experienced anti-Semitism even though I'm not a Jew. And it wasn't anti-Muslim anti-Semitism, which you could say is also anti-Semitism. It was anti-Semitism against her as a Jew, and she wasn't a Jew. And it changed the way in which she thought. And all of the founders talk about the fact that their grandparents, and even in the case some of their parents, spoke about their Jewish neighbors and their Jewish associations. And these are all, kids who grew up in the cities. You saw it in the film last week, but it's certainly in the cities. So Mimuna has been an unbelievable force. And they are the only NGO in Morocco who have been working at building a relationship globally with the Jewish people and specifically with the state of Israel. And therefore, their role now is going to become very significant. In fact, El Mehdi, the founder, and I agreed this afternoon, we're working on an article together that we want to have published both in Morocco as well as outside, about the possibilities that this offers, both for the role that the king can play and what has to be done, because we're not going to solve any problems by continuing to sit on the sidelines and pretend like the Palestinians are going to go away just because the United Arab Emirates ignored them and the Moroccans have now made whatever you want to call it. It's not a peace because they weren't at war, but it's a normalization as they're calling it. And by the way, that term normalization is the enemy term to anyone who has an association, certainly from the Arab world, of a relationship with Israel. So it's a big thing that that's the terminology that's being used, for sure. Okay, so I'd like now, having taken, again, more time than I should have talking, to turn this over to Ari to pose any questions that you have. There are already a lot of comments in the chat, and I want to try and use the balance of our time to at least address some of the things about anything that you want, whether it's about these immediate things today, about Mimuna, about my lecture last time, which was filled with a lot of information, or about the very first session that we had, or something that we haven't covered at all. And I'll try and handle whatever I can handle.
Okay, so just post your questions. I'll start with a few that I've read and that I have written down. My first question is, today, how many students are involved in the Mimuna Association, and how many campuses in Morocco? Where are they, in the throughout the country?
So today, they have probably 70 to 80 members. It's not a huge organization, but El Mehdi just told me literally like a half an hour ago that after this came out, the phone hasn't stopped ringing, and he decided that they're not taking any new members at the moment because they need to know who these people are and what their motives are. And so they're being very careful. The core group is about 30.
Um, will this normalization create a return of Jews to Morocco? What do you think?
So, yeah, so I think that what it will do, and I've actually been saying this in Morocco for many years, I think that there will be business associations that will be established, and people will buy an apartment. They'll have a house at the beach. It's not moving to Morocco is not the cost of moving, some other place in the world, in Europe or in the United States. So I think it will encourage Moroccans and non-Moroccan Jews to establish a second home in Morocco. I think that will become more common. I don't think that there will be a large number of Moroccan Jews who will move from Israel back to Morocco. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think there will be a significantly larger presence of Moroccan Jews than there are today, for sure.
The question we asked, I think we discussed last week, but what came up again in the chat was, given the history of relations between the Muslims and Jews, from Moroccans who live in Morocco, those who moved to Israel, where are they politically? But where do they stand vis-a-vis Palestinians in Israel today? Where are the Moroccans? You touched upon it, but people asked, so I figured I'd bring it up again.
Okay, so I want to also share with you. I don't yet know how to get you access to it, but there is a very important film for you to see called Ma'abarot. It's an Israeli film. It's been out for 2 years. It's a documentary, and it is really it contains stuff that you can't even imagine and that no one has ever seen. And it's very powerful. And it basically conveys the conditions under which certainly all the Moroccan Jews, with very few exceptions, lived for upwards of 12 years. First, tents, which of course collapsed in the rain and snow constantly. People lived, whole families, grandparents, parents, large families of 8 or 10 children in one large tent. If they had a small family, they had to share the tent with another family. We're not talking about staying for a few months or weeks. They lived for 12 years in these tents all over the country in horrible conditions. Disease, sanitation was terrible, everything. There was starvation in these camps. So the documentary, tells the story of the Ma'abarot. But the story that is in the story is that who was leading the country through all those years, who brought the Moroccan Jews to Israel, etc. It was the Labor Party. So when Menachem Begin finally was able to rise to enough power that he had a draw amongst the Ashkenazi world, who were mostly laborites, he was immediately able to speak to the disenfranchisement of the Moroccan and other Oriental Jews, so-called Oriental Jews. And they voted Likud. They voted for the right wing, and they have remained there ever since. Now, one of the beliefs of several of the NGO people that I was speaking to today is that when the king either literally comes to Israel or comes on Zoom and speaks to the Moroccan Jews living in Israel and says to them that he expects them to be the leadership of establishing a fair and just peace with the Palestinians, that it will have a profound effect upon them. Because you have to, again, remember what I taught you in the first class. Their lives are literally indebted to this dynasty. It was this king's grandfather who saved their lives. And the Moroccans are sentimental and loyal people. And so there's a strong, maybe strong is too strong a word, but there's a belief, or maybe even a hope, that the intervention of the king now in affairs on the ground will result, if not in a political shift entirely, it will result in a shift partially, and specifically address itself to the Palestinian question.
Just to jump around a bit, why do you think this normalization happened right now? You know, how many days we have left before the Biden administration comes in, and do you think how will it be affected by the incoming Biden administration?
Well, again, I think that the Moroccans correctly calculated that they would not have received the agreement to accept sovereignty over the Western Sahara by a Biden administration or any previous American administration, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. Trump is the only person who, would have acted this way as he has with regard to issues in Jerusalem, issues in the Golan Heights. There's a village in the Golan Heights, an Israeli village called Trump, because he agreed to the Israeli sovereignty over the areas in the Golan Heights which were of contest. So I think that's the calculation on the Moroccan side, and the offer on the American side, depending upon your political view, is either cynical and taking advantage of that situation and using it, or authentic, trying to better the situation in the Middle East by whatever means they could, which is called realpolitik. And that's probably what it is as well. You can't, in other words, for us to get involved in judging all these things on some absolute standard, I think is complicated because, in a certain way, in the world in which we're living, everybody's got their hands dirty, nobody's clean, and you can't have an absolute perfect kind of move in the political sphere. So my guess is that that's really the timing is to get it done before Trump's out of office.
Um, is there anything valuable in the Western Sahara that Morocco is after? What besides just having more land or a barrier protection? What's in it for them?
There is, if I'm correct, a source of phosphates, and phosphates is one of the, if not the biggest industry in Morocco.
One of the videos you share with us was an interview with you and Andre Azoulay. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
You are correct.
So a few questions about him. Number one, when your students go, do you get to meet with him? Is the
Yes, we
first
do.
question. And then the second question is, have you spoken to him yet about what's going on? And did he have any role to play in what's going on?
Oh, he had a very big role. I mean, he is the king's senior advisor, and when you sit in Andre's office, so if you sit in front of his desk, if he's sitting at his desk, like where my hand is now, a little bit further back would be the door to the king's office. It's a very intimate relationship, and Azoulay was brought back to Morocco. It's interesting. He was brought back to Morocco from Paris, where he was a young banker, by Hassan II, by the king's father, who had exiled him to France because of his political activity as a young communist. I mean, it's so you can imagine what kind of person Azoulay is. He's a young communist, and he becomes a banker. And today he is regarded as probably the most significantly accomplished and respected diplomat in the Mediterranean basin. And he describes, as he does in that interview, what it is to sit as a Jew at the meetings of the Arab League. It's like unbelievable. It's really, it's stuff. You may also wonder legitimately, why don't we tell these stories here in the United States? Like, why is this stuff, why are you hearing about this for the first time? It's unbelievable that we don't, we disregard all of this because it doesn't fit into the mindset of how we've been taught to think. And it's narrow-minded and it's not productive. In fact, it's counterproductive. But Azoulay is one of the most unique, gentle, competent, extraordinary human beings I've ever met. And I've met a lot of people all over the world. He is just amazing. And I'll just give you an example. Um, when when I was in Morocco in the summer of 2015, Kivunim was about to, we were going to begin in September our 10th anniversary year, and we had planned to have a sort of alumni event in December of that year of 2015. But I was feeling that, what is this? We're going to have a program like this as significant as what we do. We're going to have one of these reunions. It's going to be like college kids drinking beer, and that's going to be the end of it. And we'll watch football games. I mean, it's crazy. Something meaningful had to take place. So I was in Morocco with a group from my synagogue, from B'nai Jeshurun here in Manhattan. And the participants went with Rafi somewhere, and I was sitting doing some work on my computer. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to invite the king to come to this conference where we will honor his grandfather. And we will give him the first, and I created this like in my imagination, the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel Reverend Martin Luther King Award. And I just made it up. And I wrote this letter, to the king and described, who Kivunim was. And we've been coming to Morocco for 10 years. And, we're deeply committed, and 15 years actually, and we were involved in all kinds of stuff. And I wanted to pay tribute to what his grandfather had done for the Jewish people. And we were going to do this at this event. So I send off the letter on email to Azoulay. And he calls me up. And he says in his French accent, which I'll only try to imitate, he says, Peter, it's very nice ideas that you have, but I don't think that His Majesty will agree. But, he says, but I think it's a wonderful idea, and I will present it to him. So this is the end of July. August, nothing. September, nothing. October, the last week of October, the phone rings. It's Mimuna, Azoulay's secretary. She says, Mr. Geffen, would you speak to Mr. Azoulay? He'd like to talk with you. He gets on the phone and he says, His Majesty has decided to participate in this event. He's going to send his sister, Princess Leila Hasna, to New York to participate. He's ordered the whole diplomatic corps from Washington, New York, and the United Nations to come to this event. He's ordered the diplomatic corps to invite the entire Arab diplomatic corps. He's written to Obama and asked him to send the American ambassador back to attend. And we're coming. This is now the end of October. This event is going to take place on December 20th. I don't want to tell you what the month of November 2015 was like in my house day and night, but it was like unbelievable. But we had this amazing event. And because it's so interesting protocol, the princess came. My synagogue, B'nai Jeshurun, has gigantic 2.5-story wooden doors that open to the center aisle of a very beautiful synagogue, which happens to have been designed, as were many synagogues in the early 1920s, or late 1920s actually, in the architectural style of a mosque. And so these doors open into a space which looks like you're walking into a mosque, with the artwork and the colors and the mosaics and everything else. The doors are never used, or maybe rarely used. But for this event, they were used. The doors were opened. She arrived. Everybody was already in their seats, 1,000 people. And she dressed herself in a long, beautiful green, deep green kaftan with Jewish embroidery, intentionally. And she walked down the aisle and sat down, and the program began. And it was mostly my students doing all these different things. Really, it was quite extraordinary. I sent you an article about it in one of the first week's pieces. That one I wrote, one that was written in Haaretz. It was an amazing event. But to just give you a flavor of what happened, I had invited David Broza, who some of you may know, who's on our advisory board and is a good friend, to perform along with Mira Awad, who is a extraordinary Arab-Israeli singer. They often sing together. And they were the performers. But I was told beforehand that the royal family do not stay at events for more than an hour. So the program took an hour and 15 minutes. And then Broza was coming on. So I'm sitting sort of next to the princess, and I see her her entourage beginning to walk towards her with her coat to take her out. So I said, Your Highness, uh, we can stop for a moment because I see you have to leave. She says, Who's leaving? I'm staying. And then for the next hour, as Broza is performing in Hebrew and Mira in Arabic, she stays. I see the entourage coming back over to start to take her out. Another 15 minutes has gone by. I lean over and say the same thing. She says, I'm enjoying myself. Why would I want to leave? It was amazing. And that evening, the king had written this talk, which he had Azoulay delivering. We wanted the princess to speak, but she said, since the king is speaking, I'm not allowed to speak. I mean, it's not proper. It's not proper protocol. So she sat through the whole program. She only spoke informally, but she did not speak formally. But the king delivered through Azoulay, delivered the talk, an amazing talk, which I also sent you. You have it it's a booklet. He sent 750 booklets for everyone who was present to take home with the text in Arabic, in French, in English, and his picture. And in that quote, in that document, there is a quote about kivunim that now hangs in this brand new beautiful Jewish museum in Essaouira under a portrait of the king, and it sort of quotes the talk of that evening. Here in the heights of Manhattan, in the pews of this great synagogue, you paid tribute to my late grandfather, His Majesty King Mohammed V. Blah 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 continues on in the name of the two great leaders of the civil rights movement, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, it's stuff that sort of makes it's fairy tale kind of stories, and it's very real. Did I at all answer the question that you asked?
I have no idea, but it was a great story, and you've entertained particularly the Forsters, so I
Okay,
appreciate that.
good.
But what it means, though, is when we do go to Morocco with you, I want people to understand we have entree to very interesting people, from the students to people in the government, and we will see things that I know that we'll talk about in a second of what's going to happen with tourism in Morocco. But when we go, it'll still be a very unique trip and
No,
very
but I
interesting.
did, just to be fair, so everybody doesn't panic, I warned, at the same time that we're saying what we're saying about tourism, the Moroccans will be very careful about not flooding the country, particularly with Israelis. Um, General tourism will remain the same after COVID as it was, which was significant. It's growing every year. Um, but there will be certainly a greater rush of Israelis who want to come to Morocco, but it will be much more uh, carefully guarded because it's a complicated thing. And by the way, the Israelis will certainly guard the issuing of visas to Moroccans because it becomes a security question.
Let's stick with Andre Azoulay for a second. So
Sure.
in the video you share with us, he talks about, or I read an article about the museum that he was involved in opening in Essaouira, where he's from. So I wanted you to say a little bit about the museum there, like what's there. So when we go visit, what would we see, and what's the significance of it being opened? And then tell us about this Museum of Moroccan Jewish History, which is in Casablanca. I guess it must have opened after I was there because I was there in early '97, never heard of it.
I'm not sure when it opened, but we can check that. But the new museum, Beit Takira, um, is in Essaouira. Now, you'll remember I mentioned a few weeks ago Essaouira, which is this beautiful city on the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 2 hours due east of Marrakesh. So, as a result, since it's far away and from Essaouira, you have to come back through Marrakesh to go north or anywhere else. So, most people, most Americans, and most Americans, I would say, don't go to Essaouira because it's a round trip to get there, and so it doesn't seem to them to be worth it. Americans like to travel, you know, in a circuit. So, but Essaouira was for probably 100 years a majority Jewish city. It's a port city. To this day, it is the center of the sardine industry of Morocco. And on Pesach, if you pay attention, or if you ever go back to a supermarket again, you will see that many of the major cans of sardines that we buy in this country are from Morocco. And that industry was for a very long time only Jewish, or primarily Jewish, and probably still has a very large Jewish involvement, even though there are really no Jews, or maybe one Jew left alive, living in Essaouira. But Andre comes from Essaouira, and he decided about 20 years ago to begin to build a, to rebuild the old city with its Jewish sites, synagogues, people's homes, Jewish institutions, and to make that a critical element of the city's uh, sort of regeneration as a tourist site. In addition, it is the site of several major concert events during the year. One of which is a concert that takes place in that involves some Jewish music. There's one also in Fez, but you get in this relatively small city, you can get 100,000 people who will show up for these concerts at the beginning or the end of the summer, and Moroccans primarily, but also people from abroad. And it's a wonderful place. By the way, those of you who are old rock and roll fans may remember that Jimi Hendrix lived in Essaouira for several years, um, and um, and you have what's the name of the guy who became a Muslim? Da, 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 da. Senior moment here. You know his name. Um, all right, it'll come to me. Anyway,
Cat
Cat
Stevens.
Stevens. Cat
Cat
Stevens.
Cat
So Cat
Stevens.
Stevens also lives in Essaouira. So it's a hip place. Um, so what happened in Essaouira was that they decided to. What's interesting about, I have to take one step backwards. In a place like Essaouira, the wealthy families lived in beautiful villas inside the Medina, inside the old city, and they would have a private family chapel, a synagogue, in in their house, because their house was their business. The ground floor were usually warehouses. They had a lot of different families living in a house with a sort of open courtyard in the middle. So they had a synagogue. So one of the early restorations that Andre arranged for, but just took many years, was a restoration of the Atias family house, which has become this museum, Beit Dakira. And it's just, first of all, gorgeous just to walk into. And I was in it when it was rubble, and then to see it completely restored. The synagogue is beautiful. It's a synagogue probably the size of a 9 by 12 or 12 by 20 room, but beautiful. And it is being used as a conference center. So there are meeting rooms, There's a big open hall, and from the museum's point of view, they put in the most sophisticated, latest museumological stuff. So you've got photographs on ongoing rotations with text that you can hear with earphones. It's just a fabulous place to really give you a sense of the story of this particular community in Essaouira. And in addition, there are several synagogues that have been restored, others that are in the process, and the whole leadership of the city and the Essaouira Foundation basically have devoted themselves to the Jewish history of this city. And it's just amazing when you come there. So all the local guides know the Jewish history. I shouldn't say all, but most of them know the Jewish history. And the town itself is very proud of this part of its story, even though it's a Muslim city, obviously. Now, the museum in Casablanca is different. You may recall that when I took you to Arazan, to that little town, I told you that when Rafi came back to live in Morocco, he then began to go around to the villages to pick up photographs, clothing, dresses, jewelry, family photographs, books that people had to leave because they couldn't carry everything with them. And that's the substance of the material that's in the museum um, in Casablanca. That museum is a national museum also. These are, by the way, I should have said this, these are not Jewish community museums like we have in the United States. These are national museums, and the staff of the museums is paid for by the national government. And I don't think there's yet a permanent staff person in Essaouira, but in Casablanca, um, the staff person is a Muslim woman who came to New York to study at the Jewish Museum, so she would really know Jewish, material culture. And she's the director of the museum, although it was founded and its first director was one of these greats that I referred to last week, Simon Levy, who was one of those young Moroccan communists that also was very dedicated to the history of the Moroccan Jewish community. It's a beautiful museum.
Look forward to visiting it. In Morocco, is there education in the school system about Jewish history that's like incorporated and required in their curriculum? And do students go to these museums, for example, as required, or is it kind of it's open and people just go out of interest
Is that a
and learn about it?
planted question? Because
No.
just a week ago, there was an article in the Israeli press and of course in the Moroccan press with a sample page from the new curriculum. I think I referred to it 2 weeks ago, but it may have gone by in the midst of all the stuff that we were talking about. Um, that that the new curriculum includes a section on Jewish Morocco, and it has a picture of uh, of a group of young people sitting with a teacher, where different they represent different nationalities of the country, and one of them are Jews. And there's a description of, the opening sort of pieces of what Jews are all about. And now with this relationship with Israel, there will be much more. But yes, and in Casablanca, there is a Holocaust curriculum which is now moving across the country, and there's nothing about the Holocaust in the museum, but as part of their curriculum, all high school students have to visit at least once in their high school career the Museum of Moroccan Jewry in Casablanca.
I just found and posted one of many stories about this that I was looking up while you were talking. So it's very impressive. People have asked questions. What do you think the next Arab country, who do you think the next Arab country will be to normalize relations with Israel? Since you predicted Morocco and it came true right away during this 3-part series, who's next?
Tunisia. Tunisia, still has a after the killings at the grocery store in Paris, one of those killed was the son of the chief rabbi of Tunisia, and he was being interviewed on French television with the assumption that he was going to be very hostile towards Islam and the Arabs. And he, in his grief, I mean, his child had been killed. He said, "You know, I am the chief rabbi of Tunisia, and I have only been treated all of my career and all of my life with the greatest amount of respect. What we have to learn here is the following. In every Arab country, like I think in the United States, there are acts of hatred about uh, from one group of people to other people, which happen to also include Jews. We tend to look at those acts in the Arab world as being universal. Oh, something happens in this place, all Arabs hate all Jews, and that's the end of it. That's they because of that mythology of wanting to throw us into the sea, which was probably an expression that some wild-eyed radical did use, but again, um, the overall history in the area is far more complex. And Jewish life, yes, became more difficult after the establishment of the State of Israel because there was a confrontation with Arabs in the Arab world. But prior to that, the Jewish relationship in the Arab world, I would say, was certainly in almost every case on a par with Jewish life anywhere else in the world except the United States. And as we see in the United States, things are not perfect either, because people, we read. Now I'll switch my role for a moment. We read yesterday in the Torah reading the story of Joseph and his brothers. So Joseph and his brothers. So think about it for a second. These brothers became so hateful in their jealousy towards their brother, that they threw him into a pit, didn't kill him, but they wanted to kill him, and told their father that he had been killed by a wild animal. Now, I don't care whether you believe that the Bible is significant or not. It's an ancient piece of literature, 3,000 plus years old, whether people wrote it or God wrote it. It tells you something about the human condition. So the fact that we still live in a world in which people are hateful towards each other, this is the dark side of the human condition. But the positive side is the one that we have to pay attention to and develop and nurture and grow. That's what I spend my life doing in terms of my work as the founder and really now the president, but the person in charge of Kivunim's work of my project. We can't continue to teach children that we're, victims of oppression, and that's all we have to pay attention to, and that's our whole story, because they will ultimately walk away from that. And it's not an accurate statement of our history. Our history is far more complex, and we would not be having this conversation if our whole story was all negative. We would have gone out of business thousands of years ago. We were always outnumbered. So I think what you want to do, and I hope what this series has sort of opened up, is to consider what we're missing in understanding the positive pieces of our existence in all kinds of places in the world. And there's a lot that we all do not know. There's a lot to be learned, and it's rich and engaging and hopeful and optimistic. Okay, Ari, you want to take another one?
I think we're going to have to wrap it up very soon, but I do want to say that since we've just started this discussion, the three-part series, Morocco, you and I, when I first approached you about doing a series, I said, well, let's do a three-part series. One about Abraham Joshua Heschel, one about you and civil rights, and one about Morocco. And you said, no, we're going to do three about Abraham Joshua Heschel and civil rights, and we're going to do three about Morocco. So thank you for that insight, and it turned out very well. But since we started this program in Morocco, we've had a program about the history of the evolution of the Hanukkah menorah, in which we got to see some of the first menorahs, earliest menorahs, which were actually found in the Berber mountains, and they were by Berber Jews, and they were amazing menorahs. So we saw that just a few days ago. And then we're doing a concert tonight that I mentioned with Yale Strom, and we had a program with Yale on Friday, which he talked about his playlist. And the first song he's playing is Moroccan Melody from Mao Zur. So, it's just been very funny how everything is tied in together. We also we did a program about how the Arab conquest reshaped Judaism with a professor from Princeton University who won a MacArthur Genius Grant. And gave us an amazing, in 1 hour, overview of Jews and the Golden Age.
What's his name?
It's a her. And I have to remember her name. I'll get it to you in one
Okay.
second. She's an expert in the Cairo Geniza. She's relatively young, I would say. And Marina Rustow, if you know
Oh,
Marina,
okay.
amazing. I'll send you a link. But just such an amazing, in 1 hour, just the history. So it ties into what you were just talking about, that we in the Jewish world know very little about we know very little in general about our own Judaism, I must say, but we certainly know, and we're Ashkenaz centric. Most of us online here are Ashkenazi or Ashkenazi descent. We know nothing about the Mizrahi world, the Sephardi world, and what's beautiful about Judaism is all this richness and the history, and we can't forget it. And it has real contemporary meaning for us, because we've been talking about this Morocco stuff for 3 sessions, but now it's in the news again. And if what you're saying is true, it may play a role it may come back and now play a role, and very well will play a role in contemporary politics in Israel, in the world.
And contemporary Jewish life in a much more meaningful way.
Right. So I wanted to thank you for doing the series now, and I want to thank everybody who's been with us on this adventure. I think people have great questions. I don't know if we have that much time. So have you been to Jerba, by the way? Have you had a chance to go
I have
there yet?
not been to Jerba. Rafi keeps saying to me, "You must come to
Right.
Jerba with me," and I just have not been able to work it into my schedule. But it's on my list. I must do it for sure.
And then, and people have noted there have been lots of Israeli tourists. So there's nothing. This is not a negative commentary about Israeli tourism. Israeli tourism has been pretty big. Someone had noted maybe 50,000 a year. But the point now is, now that you have normalization of ties, it's going to be it's many people are going to go. I assume, by the way, given my history, that it's pretty affordable to go to Morocco, right? I mean, it's a pretty
It's a
affordable
reasonable
vacation.
yes.
Beautiful
It's
vacation.
I mean, the answer is you can be there, and you can spend a fortune, and you can be there and live and have a wonderful time and be more modest. Yeah,
What's that nice hotel that the Morrisons are going to stay at? The nice hotel in the world,
Mamunya,
Mimuna.
Mamunya.
By the way, I told them to stay there. Would you tell them that they should stay there if they can do it, that it's worth
But
it,
it's
right?
not. But today it's the most classic. I mean, it's
Right.
something out of another era. But Marrakesh in particular, but also in Casablanca today, there are beautiful hotels. Maybe let me just say one other little uh, little piece, which is, and I'll close with this. Um, every year there is a holiday, a 2 day holiday in Morocco called the Feast of the Throne. It's the day, and then the day after the anniversary of when the particular king in power ascended to the throne. So it takes place in different dynasties, or rather in different, uh, monarchies, in at different points during the year. So the Feast of the Throne for this king, for Mohammed VI, takes place at the end of July or beginning of August. I forget exactly when. Uh, I think it's 3 years ago. A- After, or actually, it's probably a little longer than that. We gave this award to the king in 2015. So in the summer of 2016, how time flies, I was invited to be the guest of the king at the Feast of the Throne, and it was the most amazing thing. They flew me um, to Morocco. They put me up in a very beautiful hotel in Rabat, in the capital. They drove me in a private car from Rabat to Tetuan, which is this gorgeous city. The Feast of the Throne takes place in a different city um, every year at the king's palace in that particular city. Tetuan is on the Atlantic, a gorgeous city, like a San Francisco. The event is amazing. The king um, comes out on a beautifully ornamented horse with all of these soldiers in full regalia and rifles, and all of the civil servants are dressed in white robes, and they bow down. It's like something out of the movies, out of the Arabian Nights. And it was an extraordinary event. And then they have a feast, and this was the only problem. The feast, you sit down at a table of 10, and out came these platters of all these things that I, who am kosher, don't eat until dessert. I had nothing to eat. But dessert came out. They didn't bring out a cake for the table. They brought out cakes for everybody so that you chose what kind of cake you wanted. It was an amazing thing. And I was trying to find it for today, but it's somebody's hid it in my house, some little person. I have this name tag with my picture on it. And now, since then, when I go through security in Morocco, I wear this tag, and as soon as they see the tag, that's it. They wave me through. I'm finished. I was a guest at the Feast of the Throne. There's nothing to stop. That's the end of it. So, if you travel with me to Morocco, at least I will get through quickly. You'll have to wait online, but I'll try and get you through.
We'll
Okay.
send you ahead with the bag, so it's no problem. Well, I wanted to thank you. Thank you for the series. Thank you for the stories and the background. It's really a start of learning for many of us. There are some people online. I got an email from someone who was born in Morocco.
Oh, wow.
Just found this series and wanted to learn more. And now she wants us to expand the series to a series of 10 sessions. Not sure we could do that, but the point is there is so much to learn. So go out and read, everybody. It's Hanukkah. Celebrate, read. Come tonight to listen to the first Ma'oz Tzur in Moroccan for the Moroccan tradition. Make a Moroccan dish and tell people about what you learned. I think they'll be amazed. I've sent you lots of materials over the. I'll send you some more as a follow-up that Peter has sent with me. It's real. Whatever he's talked about is, I have the official documents. I sent them to you. The story about the Mossad was in the paper. I sent that to you. And feel free to email me questions. I'm sure Peter will follow up if he has a moment and if the questions are relevant. So with that, I think that can we call our series done for now on Morocco?
Okay.
I think we'll do. We'll stamp it
done.
Jeff and Mary, we hope you appreciated this series in your honor. Thank you for being patrons of CSP. And Peter, thanks for sharing. And we look forward to. I think we're looking at maybe a year from May.
Okay, good.
Right? Traveling to Morocco. So if you want to come with us, it's a very, very intimate group. We're going to take a small group. I will work on it with Peter and we'll send you something. I think we'll have to reserve the hotels now, Peter. I think we're going to have to do that. We'll get the pricing done. I'm not worried about the airlines. I'm worried about, I don't want to sleep on the beach with the Forsters.
You got it.
In the tent. I don't want to do that. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Hanukkah. Be well, be safe, celebrate, and get your vaccinations as soon as they're available, okay? Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hagurim Sameach, everybody. Bye-bye.